Oh no, it's episode 218.
Fix it later.
Yeah.
You're live. G'day.
Welcome to Morning Minutes, episode 218. Love the one you're with or divorced.
Where's your snapper?
Yeah, we get it. This is Michael Bergio, and welcome to Morning Minutes with myself, Mark Novak, and special guest to speak about the divorce or love the one you're with, Gavan Reynolds. Good morning, Gav.
Good morning, Michael Bergio. Good morning, Mark Novak.
How are you? So great to have you on, Gav. Gav's definitely a master auctioneer. Gav's definitely a great advocate for clients. A lot of clients, high wealth clients, and I guess when a real estate agent works often for the landlord or often for the seller, so sometimes there needs to be advocacy there, and that's what you do, Gav.
It is what I do. It is what I do, and the journey that's brought me to here is an interesting one, but one that probably gives me a great understanding of both the importance of the client, the customer, and of course the real estate agent. And I think that there's a bit of a gap, or at the very least a knowledge or an acceptance gap in there a lot of the time, because what I found after a couple of decades at the real estate game is that there is a very functional and meaningful relationship between the real estate agents and people out there transacting property, be that developers that are building hundreds of millions of dollars worth of apartments or just a house. But at times it's a bit of a combative relationship, but it's really one that should be very collegial and people should be working together. So what I try and do is just bring those parties together in the most functional and the most efficient way. And generally speaking, that produces the best outcome. So
someone has to lose for someone to win in a deal. I think that's a lot of the perception. People go into it, or they just feel that's how it's got to be. There has to be a loser, there has to be a winner. But it's not the case, is it? There can both be two winners. And I think that's what you really try and do when you come from that third party advice into a negotiation.
That's right. And if we can speak about developers for a moment, because every developer that I've ever come into contact with has got their real estate agent horror story about, we dealt with such and such and it was no good.
Yep.
A lot of the times, and my experience dealing with people out there in the property game, obviously in my capacity as an auctioneer, and I've done a lot of consultancy work for real estate agencies, is that the property business is filled up with some of the most outstanding human beings on the planet. Not the best salespeople with the slickest lines and earning zillions of dollars worth of commission. That's not a measure of a great human being. It's how well they manage to navigate through life and have a true attachment to wanting to serve people. And that's the majority of people in the real estate game. It's not always the lens, though, that developers look at the real estate agent through. But the real estate agents are really good at managing, herding the cats and pulling deals together. They're not going to cure cancer. They're not going to do any of those sorts of things. They're just really, really good at pulling the transaction together, buyer and seller together at a mutually agreeable price. So let's get the real estate agents doing exactly that and solving problems for us. That's what they're great at.
Talk about divorce.
Talk about divorce. Well, I'd prefer not to talk about divorce, Mark.
Yep.
My preference would be to talk about love the one you're with.
Oh, and that's the topic of today.
That's it. Love the one you're with.
We're not marriage counsellors. We're not talking about your husband and wife. But you had a very good point you said off air, Gav, about divorces, and this will go into why we should talk about love more. They're expensive. There's generally no winner, and they're just expensive and not a nice process. So I think some people lean toward, maybe it's more of I don't know, it's just like a safety. A lot of people just think about ripping the ripcord and divorce and get out of a situation, because generally walking away is easier than working on a relationship when it comes to landlord-tenant, buyer-seller. That's what we're referring to, not a husband and wife.
Well, it's just so easy. It's just so easy to say, like, for a landlord to say, like, screw you, no, or a tenant to say screw you. It's the easier. It's by default off the cuff. It's a one answer solution. It's often just easy.
So can I go just one step further back from that? Because I think that what you're both referring to is a situation where the landlord and tenant see themselves on completely opposing sides of the transaction or opposing sides of the argument at all times in all circumstances. So again, just to give the viewers and listeners a bit of context there, with my business partner and I run, in addition to the auctioneering business, I also run a series of commercial property management businesses up and down the east coast of Australia. And one of the values that we have within that business, and I know this is very much consistent with how the team at Novak run their business as well, is probably one of the ideas that I just borrowed from you, Mark, with your permission, of course. But the tenant and landlord need to look at the occupancy of the property as a partnership. Whilst ever it is seen as a situation where there are these two warring factions on either side of the argument, if that is the situation from the day that the lease is signed, then there is no other way for it to finish up, or the most likely outcome is for there to be a separation or bloody bodies laying everywhere at the end, and they can't wait to be away from each other. Whereas if from the outset, the entire context, the entire lens that they are both looking at it through is, we are in this together and we benefit from each other's prosperity in the transaction, that can only be a good thing, because it's going to want to make them stay together, as opposed to, I can't wait till my lease is over so I can either get rid of this tenant or hammer their rent up because I really want to get them if I'm on the landlord's side, or I can't wait. Nothing will be more satisfying for me, given what a hard time I've got from the landlord, to actually go and give them the termination notice and tell them that I'm leaving the property. So
yeah, there's so much of that going on. There is so much of that going on at the moment. It is an underlying thing that no one knows what's happening unless you're a landlord or a tenant experiencing what you just said. Guys and girls, I've got to tell you, there are a bucket load of people that are like that. And we know we've got landlords like that. We've got tenants like that. Yeah.
I reckon that property manager there really needs to step in, because a lot of the time, it's how the property manager conveys either party's point of view determines that sort of feeling during that negotiations. And I think a property manager really needs to take onus on that situation and try and keep that love there between both parties, rather than turning each other against each other with those feelings. Because a lot of the time, Gav, the owner may not even be in direct contact with the tenant, or vice versa, and they've just got this animosity towards each other, and so you guys have never met. And then you think, well, that property manager really needs to step up and sort of build that bridge between both parties, because they definitely shouldn't be feeling like that, and a lot of time they are when they haven't even met each other. So what sort of suggestions do you have in that for property managers out there, or a seller or a landlord or a tenant who have that feeling and they're like, hang on, I actually never met the owner. Why do I think he's an idiot or a mean? What's wrong here?
Sure.
And Corona's added a lot of pressure to this, Gavin, yeah?
Sure, but when the world gives you lemons, make lemonade.
Yep.
There has never been a better chance for us to bring the landlords and the tenants together, or the buyers and the sellers together, for one common goal, regardless of whether we're transacting property or whether we're just trying to further improve and cement a relationship. Now, Burge said at the very start of this that we are not in here trying to offer marriage counselling. We are in our own way, because the principles that apply to a great marriage also apply to a great relationship between landlord and tenant, buyer and seller, or any of those sorts of things, because everybody can do well out of a transaction. It really is possible, but that needs to be the context with which everybody approaches it from the outset. So just as far as some of the suggestions that we can, we're in a situation now where even some of the landlords and tenants are probably feeling a bit combative at the moment. What we can actually do is we can just use Corona as an opportunity to push the reset button and say, hey, this has been all too frequently used. We are all in this together. It's going to cost you money to go and set up somewhere else, and it's going to cost me money if you leave. Just call a spade in the transaction. Call a spade in the situation and say, so
Sorry, there's music. I've got music in the background. Where's that from? Oh, that's from me. Sorry.
That's okay.
That's well said. A spade is a spade. A good situation's good and a bad's a bad. Just that honesty. I know I had that with I was showing a property yesterday with a buyer, and they were talking about the rents being reduced, and it's just like, yeah, it's a shit situation, but you're gonna own this for a long time. Let's focus on the bigger picture. And he's like,
yeah,
honesty. Yeah, it is a shit situation. A lot of rents are being reduced. A lot of tenants are struggling. A lot of landlords are struggling, and anyone selling, like at the moment, it's generally not the best environment. So they need to be sold. So let's face it, it is what it is.
And I think we forget about the discomfort. There's actually a lot of discomfort that the tenants are feeling because of the restrictions and because of what's happening with their businesses that the landlords are not aware of. Equally, there's a lot of discomfort that the landlord's feeling, not having their rental payments, and particularly in their business. People forget, tenants are forgetting that the landlord's exposure is just not to that property. The landlord's exposure. So they're thinking, well, I've been paying my rent on time. Now I want something off of my rent. But they isolate that the landlord, if their only issue is with that property. That landlord could have lost their job. Their wife could have lost their job. They could have lost their home. And this is the only thing so it's got to be very holistic in its view when you're talking to the divorce counsellor, real estate agent, in what are you feeling, Mr. Landlord, and what are you feeling, Mr. Tenant, and bringing it all together, yeah?
And not only with the tenant as well, a lot of owners are like, the tenant, that business is their livelihood. Like rent's generally only a 20, 30%. Like if you think of your revenue, most people aim for rent to only be 20, 30%. So when a tenant can't pay rent, they can't pay for petrol, they can't pay for their house, and they can't pay for anything. So I think a lot of landlords have sort of forgotten that it's not just why can't you pay the rent, because that business generates everything, generates their super, generates their savings, and generates the rent. So if they're only, instead of getting 10,000 revenue, getting 1,000, that's 1,000 they're going to live off, never let alone the rent. I think I think a lot of landlords didn't appreciate that with tenants compared to residential. Like when you look at a tenant, yeah, they get $750 a week for JobKeeper, but if their rent was $4,000 a week and they got to live off $3,000, $750 doesn't cover anything. And they were a lot more open to they were very vulnerable compared to, say, a residential tenant where, yeah, it was just different. I think a lot of people forget that on a commercial tenancy, it's not just the rent, it's their livelihood, it's everything.
So let me just sum up I think the simplest possible tip that I can give, and this comes back to what I was touching on before about us, but being marriage counsellors for things that aren't your traditional form of marriage. If a relationship is to remain functional, it requires communication. It can't just be communication at times of crisis.
Yeah.
So constantly checking in on both sides is our job, us property people. It is our job to continue to move the chess pieces around, because we have the visibility on all parts of the market, all parts of the individual transaction, and all parts of the greater things happening in our specific geographic area. The landlord is there dealing with all of the stuff that they've got to manage through in their lives. The tenant is just trying to keep their head above water and return to prosperity in their businesses. So it's our job to try and create an environment where everybody is seeing things as they are, not worse or better, just as they are. We need to give them a very, very concise snapshot of what's happening and encourage them not to be one of the statistics that either has spent way more than they should relocating their property, or their business rather, and putting their business under further stress. And on the landlord side, we don't want them to be one of the properties for an example for you guys on Pittwater Road, DY, or down in the heart of Brookvale there, where the local papers are beating the drum about 547 fall lease signs on commercial properties in the Northern Beaches. I mean, it's a great headline, and the media love to kick the tripe out of us at every opportunity they ever get. But coming back to what the point that I want to make so specifically here, it's communicate now, and communicate on bended knee on both sides. You don't need to eat shit from anybody. I'm not asking you to do that, but just go in there with the context of, how can we best work together? Because, but that can't just be a coronavirus approach. It needs to be the way that we look at each other in the transaction right the way through forevermore. No more wars, no more combat. I want you, you want me, let's go forward together.
Yeah. And you're both there. You're both there, and it's so fitting. Make it bloody work. It's fitting. You're there, you're running your business. Sure, there's some pain with COVID. Owner, come on, let's do something. And then, it's all there. It's the diamonds are under your nose.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you're right, Gav. There's always going to be pain. There's always going to be a COVID scenario, not in particular COVID, but there's always going to be something like that throughout that relationship. And I think you're right. The tenant wants to be there. They don't want to relocate, and the owner doesn't want it empty. And I think sometimes they put their guard up or get a bit stubborn, pretending that's not the case. But let's face it, you both want to be there, so communicate it through. And I really, I like that. I like that. And I think it's communicating more in the good times makes it easier to communicate in the bad times as well.
100%. 100%.
And calling bullshit's hard, Gav. Like, calling bullshit's hard because there are actually tenants that have not been affected in their businesses, that have put their hand up, that owners are thinking, are they calling? So it's making it harder for the actual genuine tenants, because some owners are actually going, I don't believe it, I don't see it. Like, it's a really hard one to call.
It is a hard one to call, but I think the initial context needs to be one of trust, but with a high level of vigilance as far as the fact checking is concerned. So, and again, I think that even needs to be that way with in the communication, the initial communication with the tenant. Let's say 80% of the tenants are telling the truth about their financial situation. If the first response when they come to you and say, I am on the bones of my ass here, is, well, prove it.
Yeah.
You are literally, someone's just come to you bearing their soul, saying, I'm gone here. And you're saying, well, prove to me that you're about to, we should switch the life support off. Come on, prove it. It's not, it needs to be, okay, I believe you. And I'm very sorry that you're in that situation. The owner will be willing to support you in whatever way they can. Now, that'll be different for everybody. But what we're going to need to do, because obviously they've got masters too, be that other investors, be that whoever, we'll need to be as open and transparent as possible with them so that we can maximise the support you can receive.
Now, you've just said the same thing in two different ways.
Exactly right. But one, we have got the tenant right alongside us, and the other, they are opposing us, and we are in the scrum pushing against them. And that's not the space we want to be in COVID or any other time. So I'm in Brisbane today. I flew up here last night. Crossing across the Queensland border wasn't the easiest task, but that's a story for another time. We're up here running one of our regular training events for our guys up here. And since the day the business was incepted, we have run with this thing where the view that we take of the tenants is that they are the second most important people to our business, second only to the landlord. And they probably receive 60 to 70% of the communication that we've got outgoing at any given time. And we're always, COVID or not, checking in with them as far as how their businesses are going. Because the last thing that we want, even in a good market, is those dirty little tenant stealing ninjas, the tenant reps diving in and weaseling our great tenants away from properties that we've got where we've got a very harmonious relationship going on, and they're being told, hey, there's a prettier boy or girl down the road here. Yeah. Build the relationship. If the foundation is strong, it doesn't matter how good the ninja is. They're not pulling your tenant away.
Well, this is where frequency builds trust, and I think just like as an agent, when you're trying to get a listing, or when your vendor's on the market, you're constantly communicating with them, and then if there is hard truth to give, they believe it. Same as a tenant, frequency builds trust. So there should always be that continual reporting and touching base, not just when it's bad. Because you're right, if you're in regular contact with your tenant or your agent is to the landlord, and there's that communication, then when something comes up, then it just, it's a lot easier for people to digest, and you've got that trust because each week you've been communicating rather nothing for 3 years and I'm struggling, I need this, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, well, prove it, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it is that frequency builds trust.
Yeah.
Let's talk about
Love it.
the market just quickly, what you've experienced.
Auctions
Up and running.
Auctions are back. Auctions are back, but again, I'm sorry to be the non rock star supermodel auctioneer here, but I'm going to tell you the truth about what's happening out there in the auction market.
Cut.
That's it. Turn it off. No. So my predominant area of operation is that Newcastle, Hunter, Port Stephens market.
Where's that?
Yeah. Okay. So it's not a suburb of Sydney.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, so when you
like
it's where you go for holidays.
Yeah. So it's not too far away. You can get there on a tank of fuel.
Yep.
And there's an airport and big buildings in Newcastle. I just don't want my dear friends from Sydney to be too shocked when they get there. That's all.
So Newcastle, probably homes, units, or a bit of everything.
A bit of everything, and the CBD of Newcastle is seeing a bit of a renaissance. There's some fairly significant developments. Iris Group are doing something which is
structure, isn't there? $3 billion.
A lot of construction going on. Yeah, a lot of construction. Not Newcastle West. It's just if you'd been to Newcastle even 5 years ago and drove through it today, your jaw would be on the ground, given how much has happened just in that short period of time. But wow. I mean, and what shocks a lot of people about Newcastle is that the values of the properties are significantly higher than what people outside of Newcastle and specifically Sydney would expect. You know, I mean, people come out of Sydney expecting to be able to buy houses in Newcastle for 200,000 or 300,000 or 400,000, and there's regular transactions in Newcastle at $4, $5, and $6 million for homes.
Yeah.
We saw an apartment transact in the last little while for $6 million. So that's not a day in, day out proposition like it is in Sydney, but it's still happening.
I saw Mark Kemmell's one mark, 5.5 million for a penthouse it looked, when I saw that, I was like, what? I thought you could buy Newcastle for 5.5. Yeah. But it does show where that population growth and the density goes from the centre and then outwards. And give us a key point. People will live, because how quick can you get from this Newcastle CBD to Sydney CBD? Is like, that's improved over the last 5 years dramatically, hasn't it?
Yeah, if you're driving, it's 2 hours.
Yeah, but train, isn't it?
Train, you're probably more like, I mean, there's an express which will get you into the 2 hours 30, 2 hours 40 between the two CBDs.
So most people are living and working in the area then?
They are.
Is that the coal train?
The coal train. What you do is you get in one of those sperm suits that they do the asbestos, and you just jump in like the third carriage, and they know just to slow down as you're going through Central. So
2 hours and 40.
There's some mattresses on the side of the track, and you just jump. So
jump.
Yeah.
So, and how's that growth been just during COVID before? Are you back to where you were with auctions, or are you?
Yeah, so we are. But again, just wanting to paint the most accurate picture, the numbers have improved significantly. So obviously we went into the COVID situation where we were calling the auctions only online, which was an experience, but one that was surprisingly rewarding. I didn't think it'd be as well received as what it was, and it's really encouraging to see that that's occurred. Then obviously they let us loose again with some regulations around social distancing and the like, and we were running, and still are to this day, running the auctions in hybrid. So we do the online bidding auction as well as on site, so people can participate either way. And again, that's been quite well received. But what we are noticing is, even though the numbers have come back up, there are probably only 30% of the properties actually getting to auction day. Now, in the main, it is because there are transactions happening prior.
Okay.
There are a few that people are realising that there just isn't support for their prices at the expectations that they've got. the market makes that very clear, and that's one of the great things about actually going through the auction process is that they are working out pretty easily and quickly that there just isn't support for their property, which if I was an owner and I had a specific price at which I wanted to sell, I'd want to know as quickly as possible that the market wasn't there so I could get my home off the market and try again at another time.
I like that wording, support price. There isn't that.
Yeah, but because I mean, no one. You say, oh, the market's not there, or no one's going to pay that, or whatever. So if I'm an owner that's not motivated by price, I've got some other motivation. Well, let's get the signs down, and we'll try again at another time. And no one gets frustrated by that.
Yes.
As opposed to continuing to push the barrier. Anyway, once again, conversation at length for another time.
Yep.
Yeah, I reckon we'll do that with auctions the next couple of weeks, 4 weeks or something. If you're around, we'll bring on auctions and start nailing that, and we'll probably have a bit more clarity with COVID in New South Wales around that as well.
So let me round up just a very quick market snapshot. What we're finding is we are doing a lot of auctions where it is 1 or 2 registrations, and we are just getting in with exactly the same ethos or spirit that I'm talking about with the landlord tenant, love the one you're with, and just negotiating a deal. And that comes back to high levels of communication prior to the auction about you may very well be the only buyer there, and saying to the sellers, this isn't about a big rock star finish with with numbers. It's about ensuring that a buyer is here to transact with you.
Yeah.
That is what we're trying to create with auctions. That is the benefit of auctions, because certainly in our market in Newcastle, the agents who fell back on their private treaty transactions found themselves in a situation where they'd negotiate a deal and the contracts would go out and the sales advisors would go out, and unfortunately the deal prevention officers, also known as our learned legal friends, would then have the transaction sit there for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and oh, goodness me, the thing's fallen over.
Yeah.
What a huge surprise. This allows you to maintain a greater level of control by actually bringing maybe the single buyer that you've got and your seller together at a time to actually negotiate a deal and ensure that it's closed out.
So much so that you're now actually getting 30% of the auctions now in the auction room, rather than what were the numbers before? That's probably double the amount of people.
Yeah, we're probably saying 60% of the properties get through to auction day.
Yeah.
All right. It's been good. It's been a pleasure having you on, Gav. We'll definitely do it again. Mr. Novak's always been good. This will be podcasted and redistributed as well if anyone wants to hear, rather than looking at our wonderful faces.
Thanks, Gav. You're a legend.
Thank you, guys.
Love the one you're
with. Yes, love the one you're with. And by the sounds of things, I'll see you all again soon.
Awesome. All right.
Okay.
Thanks.